It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. Glad you're joining us today for the show that's about all things University of Louisville. We're going to be talking research, presidential libraries, China, all things that are going on at the University of Louisville. So I hope you'll stick around for the next half hour or so as we lead you through things at U of L. All right, so what have we got coming up a little bit later on this show? Well, China. Is it really transitioning to a market economy and an open society? A recent speaker at the University of Louisville thinks so, and he's written a book about it called How China Became Capitalist. We'll have an interview with Ning Wang. But first, President Obama is about to leave office and will soon be joining a host of other ex-presidents with presidential libraries. So who came up with this idea of presidential libraries, and what might be in President Obama's? Do taxpayers foot the bill for these things? Ben Huffbauer is an associate professor of art history at U of L, but has a special interest in presidential libraries, and he's here to talk about it. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. How in the world did an art history guy get an interest in presidential libraries?
Well, I was with my wife in the West African country of Nigeria, and when you're in a foreign country for a long time, everything in your own country begins to seem a little strange. And I thought to myself, what are these things I've heard about called presidential libraries, and what do they do? And when I got back, I found there was a lot to study about them.
I guess you didn't find any presidential libraries in Africa while you were there. Is that what you're saying?
No, they weren't there, but actually they've now in Nigeria, they're thinking of copying our model and having presidential libraries.
Presidential library in
presidents.
Nigeria?
Right.
That's pretty funny. Well, let's talk about President Obama. He's the one heading out the door here, and he's getting ready to, or well, not he's getting ready to, but a commission, I guess, is getting ready to build a presidential library. So tell us a little bit about presidential libraries in general, and then we'll talk a little bit about specifically President Obama's.
Well, these days when presidents retire, they open these huge monuments to themselves, and they have different parts to them. They've got giant museums that tourists can go to and see all sorts of things like full-scale recreations of the Oval Office. They have video games where you can play the president and so on. There's also an archive of documents and electronic records that takes decades to open that researchers go to. And then finally, there's a policy institute or philanthropy center that presidents use. And all of these things tend to enhance the president's reputation, which is why they really like them.
But the presidents aren't building them. They're out collecting money from their donors and friends and stuff to build these things, right? Or are taxpayers footing the bill for these?
It's both. It's taxpayers and private money. They raise the money for these buildings, which are huge and spectacular. $250 million about to build the George W. Bush Center in Dallas, Texas.
$250 million?
$250 million. And then another $250 million is another equal amount for an endowment for the Bush Institute in Dallas. So it has an endowed center. And these are beautiful buildings. Robert A.M. Stern, a renowned, award-winning, one of the best architects in the world, designed the Bush Library, and similar quality of architects for others, like I.M. Pei, who did the pyramid for the Louvre. He designed the Kennedy Library. Anyway, so they've got all these different parts to them, and presidents raise money from their private donors, and this is essentially unregulated. They can get this money from foreign governments, from individuals, anyone. They don't need to disclose any of it.
Really? And so right now, President Obama, for instance, is he out raising money, or is someone on his behalf out raising money from foreign governments for his presidential library, or do you have any idea?
Well, they've begun to do that, although actually I think President Obama, because of concerns about that, undue influence from a foreign government, has said he will not raise money while in office from foreign governments.
Okay.
Although past presidents apparently have done that.
I've got a lot of questions about some of the presidential libraries that are out there, which ones you think are best and that kind of thing, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's talk about President Obama. What is he building, or what is being built in Chicago or in the Chicago area for President Obama?
Well, there's a park called Jackson Park that has some vacant land there, and they're building this huge center. It's associated with the University of Chicago, so it has an academic affiliation, but we'll have those three parts. It'll be a spectacular building that has a museum, and then it will have an archive of the records, and then it will have an Obama Center or Institute where he can advocate policies or do philanthropic work and so on.
We're talking with Ben Huffbauer, who is an associate professor at the University of Louisville, and he's got a special interest in presidential libraries. And you've written a book about presidential libraries, right?
Right here.
Oh, you got a copy of it with you. Of course you
There
do.
it is.
Presidential Temples is the name of it. So is President Obama's going to be a temple? Do you think this is going to be a temple?
Well,
to use your word?
I think they're all temples or pyramids. Some people have called them America's pyramids.
Okay.
And I think that's a good way to put it. Robert Caro, I don't know if you've ever read the giant biography of Lyndon Johnson that Robert Caro's written. Anyway, he called them America's pyramids because these things have gotten much bigger. Franklin Roosevelt started these, but it was kind of modest when he began. And they've grown exponentially since then.
What do you suspect will be in President Obama's library? If you were putting together his presidential library, what are some of the things that you would put in it?
Well, it's highly likely that there's going to be an Oval Office replica. Presidents since Harry Truman in 1957 have had a full-scale Oval Office replica in their presidential library museums. This is the place where Americans imagine presidents making big decisions. You know, when you see movies and you see a president, a fictional president, they're in their Oval Office making these grand decisions, or TV shows. And so that's where tourists imagine they want to see a president. And so that's something you can almost guarantee is going to happen. Another thing that you're probably going to find in the Obama library is interactive video stuff. Almost a video game of the presidency. Like at the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas, you play basically video games where you become the president and you decide, should we invade Iraq or shouldn't we, for instance? Although I should say that these things are kind of slanted. So in the Bush Library, if you say, I'm not sure we should invade Iraq, I'm not sure about the connection with 911, President Bush comes on the TV personally and says, no, you made the wrong decision. We must invade Iraq. That's what we have to do.
Of course, because it's his library and he can say he made the right decision, right?
And that's where the question of federal funding comes in, is these are really museums of, they're kind of fun, ridiculous, over the top, but they're infomercials, kind of museums of propaganda. They present the president's point of view, which is all fine. But the question is, should we as taxpayers be supporting them? They're built with private money, but then they're handed over to the federal government. And so they're run by the federal government through the National Archives. And so it's not a lot of money, but a tiny bit of our tax dollars goes
what
towards...
What are we talking about, for instance, on an annual basis to run the George W. Bush Presidential Library and the Clinton Library and the Kennedy Library?
Oh, it's not a lot of money. It's like $8 or $9 million per library.
It's a drop in the bucket.
It's a drop in the bucket compared to anything. But you do have to kind of wonder, should we be running basically a pyramid, a museum of propaganda? Some people have suggested, maybe if they're going to raise $500 million to run these, why not just run them privately? Why does the government need to be involved if they're going to be propaganda museums? Although over time, they tend to get better. And the museums tend to become less slanted as they revise them over the years. And they really do become effective learning centers.
I've been to the Clinton Library. I've been to Kennedy's. I'm trying to think if I've been to any others. I don't think I've been to any others. The Clinton Library, I thought had a lot of stuff. I'm an old political reporter, and so I looked at it with a little bit of a jaundiced eye. But I thought it did a good job of recreating history, but there were some parts where I'm just going, oh, come on. I mean,
Exactly.
You wrote the PR script for Bill Clinton here. With President Obama, I'm sure it's going to be talking about Obamacare and ACA. There will be that was his main accomplishment. So will there be, in your mind, probably a whole wing or a whole section just on the Affordable Care Act?
I don't know, a whole section, but yeah, there'll probably be something significant. Presidents, as you say, they always tout what's positive. They minimize it. When you go to these presidential libraries, it doesn't seem like any president ever has made a mistake. And as we know, presidents sometimes make mistakes.
Yeah, occasionally do that, yeah.
Yes. And so over time, though, as these get revised, so for instance, if you went to the Nixon Library in California 10, 15 years ago, you'd see Watergate was all a big misunderstanding. Nothing ever went wrong. But finally, the government said, well, we need to do a little more factual presentation here. So now you find out, yeah, some nasty stuff happened in the Watergate scandal. And for most presidents, that's what occurs. They tend to be propaganda museums for 30 years or something like that, but then a more balanced view takes over.
We're here with Ben Huffbauer from the University of Louisville. He is an associate professor of art history, but has a special interest in presidential libraries, and that's what we've been talking about. So how many of the presidential libraries have you been to?
I think I've been to about 8 or 9 of them. So not all of them. There are 14. So maybe I've been to 10.
Okay. What's your favorite?
I've got
And
at
why?
least I've got at least 2 favorites. One is the Truman Library because its museum has really been the most thoroughly revised. It was the first with an Oval Office replica. It's also got a beautiful painting by an artist I admire named Thomas Hart Benton, a big mural called Independence and the Opening of the West. You can look up at it online. Kind of shows this big Western landscape, and then you go into the Oval Office and imagine presidential power. But the museum itself has very sophisticated exhibits. So, for instance, in terms of one of Truman's big decisions was dropping the atomic bomb on Japan. And it presents a very nuanced point of view of like, this may have shortened the war, but also a lot of civilian casualties, a lot of other things. It presents a balanced point of view on that and several other major decisions that Truman made. Overall, Truman is recognized as one of our great presidents, and so even a nuanced view of Truman makes him look pretty good. For other presidents, that might not be so. Another favorite I have is the Johnson Library in Austin, Texas. The building, it really does look like a pyramid. It's this colossal, huge 8-story thing. He said he wanted the biggest presidential library ever, and at the time it opened, it was the biggest because, Johnson's ego was the biggest. And there are just stories of Johnson. He was, he's kind of famous for his politicking and sometimes even maybe rigging elections early in his career. Well, after he left office, he was very concerned about attendance figures in his library. And there were stories that he said, well, we need to open earlier and offer free donuts to bring our numbers up. And he would, when they have big events like signing his memoirs, he would, if the numbers weren't enough, people clicking the counters hadn't given him enough numbers, he would say, okay, come on, everybody. And he was 6'4" tall. He would bring people out of the museum, a huge crowd, and then bring them back in so they'd be counted twice.
The turnstiles would turn
Right.
twice. That's funny. That's really funny. Well, is there any photo of him in there where he's showing off his scar from when did he get his appendix removed or something? And he showed the scar.
Right, in the 60s.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a famous photo and story about Lyndon
Right,
Johnson. He was showing reporters and photographers his big scar that he had in his abdomen.
And I think there was a op-ed cartoon showing that was Vietnam.
Yeah, well, fitting. And Truman's is in Missouri, I assume, but where in Missouri?
Independence, Missouri.
Independence, okay.
Nice little town right outside of Kansas City.
Okay, so worth the trip, probably.
It is worth the trip. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any that you've been to that you just said this is over the top, and as a taxpayer and as a guy who loves history, this is just over the top, and you wouldn't recommend going to?
Well, I think they're all worth going to, but you do, as you say, you have to have a jaundiced eye, look at them critically. They're both of them. For Democrats and Republicans, they're slanted, but at the Ronald Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, spectacular, beautiful, up on a hill. You probably remember when they had the funeral there. But if you go there, the biggest scandal of Reagan's presidency was the Iran-Contra Scandal. And for the first 20 years it was open, they had not a word about that. Then finally, the criticism, as I've said, over time, they finally have added a section just in the last few years about here's the Iran-Contra Scandal, what happened with it. But I think, I don't know, if you're a fan of history, I think all of them are worth going to. You just have to keep a critical eye to it and kind of wonder, should taxpayers be paying for this? Who knows?
Do these presidential libraries change people's minds in any way
about
the president?
I think they really do in multiple ways. The museum is a big museum of, a slanted museum that helps change people's minds about certain things. Then these philanthropic centers also improve the image of presidents, as you see them doing, with the Carter Center, doing election monitoring, fighting disease in Africa and other things. I mean, I think a lot of people, no matter what they thought about Carter or his presidency, they think he's one of the best ex-presidents. And the Carter Center in Atlanta is his foundation for that.
Yeah, I've been there, and that is really nice. It's a very nice one. All right, Ben Huffbauer from the University of Louisville. Interest in presidential libraries. You're going to write another book about this when once Obama's library gets ready. You got to update your book.
No, I'm all done with that. Who knows? Maybe I'll write an article.
Yeah, all right, very good. Well, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it. Last month, the Schnatter Center for Free Enterprise at the College of Business at the University of Louisville brought another great speaker to campus. This one was Ning Wang. He's born in China, and I interviewed him while he was in town, and he talked about the economy and freedoms in China. I'm here now with Dr. Ning Wang, who is visiting the University of Louisville. He's a guest of the Schnatter Institute for Free Enterprise at the College of Business at the University of Louisville. He's going to be making a speech on this day that we're recording this interview. You are a senior fellow at the Ronald Coase Institute, and you're here in the United States these days, but you were born in China, and you've got some fellowships and other positions at, 2 or 3 other universities in China and Hong Kong, correct?
Correct.
Okay, but you were born in China.
Correct. I was born in a village in Hebert province, and the first time I left my hometown was when I, at age 15, went to Beijing for my college education. That's the first time, even though China already started reform at that time, but still mobility very limited, particularly for rural kids.
Right. We're talking with Dr. Ning Wang, who's visiting the University of Louisville, and you've written a number of books, and you make speeches all across the world about China, about the economy of China, capitalist society, what's going on in China. So what is the difference in China today, from your perspective, economically, from the way it was in 1970, when you were growing up in China, and what it is in 2016?
Before China really started this, economic reforms and opening up, China was very much a centralized economy. Most of production controlled by the government. There was no private enterprise. There was no market unless it's underground, illegal. Today, the Chinese economy very much driven by private entrepreneurship. Even though state enterprise is still there, the state still monopolizes a few sectors, including the banking sector, but the vast majority of the economic activities undertaken by private initiatives.
If the United States is a true 100% capitalist economy, which it isn't, but let's assume the United States is close to a true capitalist as you're going to get, where would China be? 80%, 60%?
In certain areas, China is more capitalistic than America.
How so?
I'll give you one example. I'm not saying whether this is good or bad. Just
You're
stating
just saying it's more capitalist. Okay.
a fact that U.S. has more regulations in labor market or any market you can think of. China, because the market economy just started there, so the government, doesn't know what to regulate, how to regulate. So the regulatory market is not well developed in China. So that's part of the reason why China has been able to attract a lot of foreign capital to invest in China, because the cost of doing business is quite reasonable in China compared with
the wages are not
wages
regulated. Did they have minimum wage?
Now they
China?
have now. It started about 2008, 2009.
Okay.
So China now started to regulate the labor market. Actually, that's how they got that idea from U.S., from other European countries.
From the minimum wage?
The minimum wage, right.
But back to my question then, as a whole though, you pointed out one aspect that China may be more capitalist than the United States, but as a whole, in taking the entire economy into view, what would you say? Where would you put them on that scale from 0 to 100%?
Oh, China still has a long way to go to become what we call a free enterprise economy. One defect of the Chinese system we emphasized in the book, and many times in my talks, is that China right now does not have a free market for ideas. The kind of interview we have now.
Right.
I've been interviewed in China many times. Let me just give you one concrete example to show the lack of free market for ideas in China. So our book is How China Became Capitalist, published here and translated into 7, 8 languages now. In all other translations, they keep the original title. Just translation of English to another language.
Okay.
But in Chinese, our publisher told us, no, we cannot keep capitalism in the title. So instead, the Chinese title of our translation is China Under Transformation.
So it doesn't even have capitalism in the title.
Right.
So, well, at least it wasn't how China maintains its communism. It didn't say that, so it could have been worse.
Right. and we have a subtitle. It's China's Road to Market Economy. So China is okay with the market economy, but not capitalism.
We're talking with Dr. Ning Wang, who has studied China and has written several books and talks about China on tour across the United States and other places around the world. And he's a guest of the Schneider Center for Free Enterprise at the University of Louisville today. What would you say has been the impact of this modern Chinese economy on the United States?
Well,
has it been good or bad?
Yeah, this is a big question, I think.
Well, you're going to get asked it tonight probably after you make the speech, so here's your preparation.
I think from the U.S. perspective, I think not only China, but India and other economies joined the global market economy has made goods really cheap here in U.S. So here we have a statistics saying that U.S. the labor wage have not gone up, I don't know, over the past 20, 30 years, so on and so forth, and the income for American working families stayed constant, so on and so forth. But that picture does not tell you, that statistics doesn't tell you the whole picture, because with the same amount of income, right now Americans can produce much more stuff and better stuff than what they could say years ago. Partly because China, India, and a bunch of other countries joined this global division of labor, becoming suppliers, to the global market, to the global economy. And of course, the downside or the dark side of this global competition is American jobs lost to China, India, and so on and so forth. That, of course, has become the number one, I think, issue in U.S. regarding
That's why Donald Trump was just elected partially on that issue.
Exactly.
Trade with China and other countries like China.
Right. But I think this is a theme I'm going to emphasize in my talk this afternoon, that if economics has anything to contribute, is not just the belief, but also I think is the truth that trade and specialization, or to use the word of Adam Smith, is division of labor and exchange made human civilization possible. That's how we rose up out of jungles and caves and become civilization because of trade and specialization.
So should the United States and United States workers fear China? Because, and I premise that question by knowing that I talked to, I think, a former colleague of yours, Frank DeCotter, who was here speaking. Are you familiar with him? He would argue that the Chinese government is still very much in control of what happens in the economy in China, and that China is still not necessarily a great friend to the United States, but at least on economic terms, is an enemy. So what would you say?
Oh, I would quite disagree with him on that point. I have a lot of American colleagues. I took them to China. They see a lot of similarities between China and the U.S. And there are a lot of common spirits, so to speak. America, of course, is a country of immigrants. It's freer than any other country in the world. China, we don't see China in that picture, but actually China is quite open. Not now, not in the past, say, 200 years, but if you go back, China, of course, has this long
comparatively speaking.
history. Right. China really is a very open civilization. What now they call the Han Chinese really is not an ethnic category. This concept that we have one race against another, this is a very much a Western concept, because in the process of building up nation states, we developed that kind of concept, race. In China, really, people, it's like the melting pot, the American metaphor. China was one centuries ago. So in Tang, particularly Tang, Han dynasty, you have people coming from Korea, Japan. They work in China, they live in China, They didn't even have government jobs in China at that time.
So where are we today? Back to my question then. Do you think American workers and America in general should fear the Chinese, or are we friends of the Chinese?
Well, I'm an economist, so I will say from what I believe, trade is better for everyone.
Free trade is better for everyone.
Free trade, everyone. But that free trade is better for everyone, but for the system to work, for the system of the global economy to work, we have to impose constraint on individuals, on individual organizations, that the firms may fail, they face bankruptcy, and the individuals may lose their jobs and start searching for new jobs again. That is a constraint, that is a price we have to pay in order to have a global market system.
Right. Got about 30 seconds left. Last question. What do you see for the future of China? Do you see it becoming more and more capitalist, A, and B, as part of that, do they automatically become a more open country?
Somehow may question your assumption a little bit.
Okay.
China is very open in the economic terms.
In economic terms, I'm talking about in social media, not putting any constrictions, and no political prisoners, those kinds of things.
China is not open in political terms.
Okay.
China has a long way to go to become a politically open society.
But will capitalism force China to open up more?
Has already done that.
Okay.
And I think this is not just a view of the Chinese people on the street, but even the government. The President Xi Jinping realized China has to become more open, economically, politically, culturally. That's the way. That's the trend of history. Yeah.
And you see that happening?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Dr. Ning Wang, who's the guest of the Schneider Center for Free Enterprise at the College of Business at the University of Louisville. Appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That'll about do it for this show, and we always try and wrap these up with a Did You Know segment, a little bit of trivia about the University of Louisville. So today's Did You Know segment. The Brandeis School of Law's class of 2019 represents a dramatic increase of racial ethnic minority students over the class of 2018. In fall 2016, this year, 21 racial ethnic minority students enrolled at Brandeis Law compared to the 13 minority students who enrolled in the fall of 2015, and that's an increase of 42% over last year's class entering law school. Thank you all for listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. You can find these programs every Monday night at 6 o'clock, right after Ramsey and Rutherford on 93.9 The Ville. You can also find video versions throughout the week on Metro TV here in Louisville and on KETKY across the state. You can also see me on WHAS TV's Great Day Live every Monday morning around 9:30 or so with another story about something going on at the University of Louisville. Thanks for listening, and go Cards.